Good afternoon from the Foundation Studio on Biloxi's Back Bay. Welcome to a special duck edition of Super Talk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful Super Talk Mississippi Radio Network. But if you're listening on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast, it's December the 13th, 2021. By the way, if you're on Facebook, go to our Super Talk Outdoors Facebook page and follow us. And please share it with your friends who love Mississippi's outdoors. We put all the videos to our shows up there. And so if you want to watch each week, you can do that there. Also, you can watch us on Super Talk TV, on C Spire TV. Hey, just a quick note. I want to share with you that we've done some incredible things here at the Super Talk Mississippi Radio Network. I spent a career running newspapers and digital media companies, and I'm super impressed with Super Talk Mississippi Media. It's actually a one of its kind in America, statewide radio and multimedia powerhouse. It's an innovative approach driven by the owner of Super Talk. His name is Steve Davenport. He's an incredible leader. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this great team. We've been moving quickly toward Christmas. And, I've been hearing a few decent duck reports here and there. It's been super warm weather, as we all know. Deer are starting to lock down, though, and we're hearing about chases all across the state of Mississippi. At the end of the day, man, it's a great time to be in Mississippi. Family, friends, and the outdoors. Wow. But I wasn't at my place, Delta Bluffs, our special place in the Mississippi Delta this past weekend. My wife, Ann, and my godchild, Alex Waldrop, is getting married, and friends held an engagement party for her, so we weren't able to go up to the Delta, had to stay home. Organizers there did a really good job. It was an incredible party, but they did not get the memo not to schedule a party like that on the at the beginning of rut. So we got some educating to do there. Anyway, it's a great time of the year on the coast, so I was glad to be here for sure. I looked outside my window while I was drinking a cup of coffee Saturday morning, and the bay only had a few ripples on it. The rising sun was incredible. I could see white pelicans, egrets, ducks, flocks of Canadian geese. The scene there was literally incredible. Winter in coastal Mississippi is so special, but winter across Mississippi is incredible, especially if you love the outdoors. We didn't plan to do any fishing Saturday because of the approaching front. Incidentally, prayers to all of our neighbors who were impacted by the devastating tornadoes. A path of destruction 200 miles long across 9 states. Good Lord. So many people and towns impacted by those storms. And Mississippians we know too well, actually, about terrible disasters. So we know what our neighbors are going to need over the coming months and weeks and years. Not the least of which is our prayers. So sad. Anyway, back to Saturday morning. We had expected the front to have everything stirred up in the bay. But as I could see from my quick view out my window, there was a calm bay and what looked like was going to be a small fishing window. So I finished my coffee and I headed down to the pier and dropped my skiff. We usually, this time of year, we usually fish with soft plastics. And we fish real slow. I mean, I'm talking about really slow. And the fishing is usually really, really good. But over the last couple of years, my son Jordan, by the way, we call him the fish whisperer. He set a number of state fishing records. He's gotten me hooked on topwater fishing, something I used to do many, many years ago. But man, the topwater bite, when it's on, there's really literally nothing better. Even this time of year, the speckled trout and the redfish will literally explode on the bait. So Saturday morning, I got super committed to topwater, and man, I wasn't disappointed. The topwater bite was, in fact, on. Sure is good to see fishing in Back Bay getting back to where it used to be. See, the problem was we had so much rain over the summer, and the saltwater salinities in the bays all along coastal Mississippi have been out of balance for most of the summer. So speckled trout in particular are super sensitive to salinity. But now that the salinities are back up where they need to be, the winter redfish and speckled trout fishing is back on. I saw a bunch of mullet jumping. The tide movement was incredible. Really the perfect the perfect fishing conditions. By the way, one last little quick note: my friends Travis Dunn and Mark Creech were up in Lambert hunting, duck hunting at Travis's place, and they sent me a video. They had a really good hunt Saturday morning, but they sent me a video. I had just casted my topwater. We were on this area we call the point, or I was on this area called the point. I casted it out, and my lure was just sitting on the surface, and I saw that I had a text, and it was a video. I hit play on the video, and suddenly I heard, a picture like a big bonita or a yellowfin tuna, coming up to the surface. Just an extreme explosion on my bait, and literally almost pulled the rod out of my hands. Actually, it's a good thing it didn't get hooked, or it probably would have taken the rod out of my hand. But that just tells you, man, this time of year, when a redfish or a big speck gets committed, man, they are all over it. By the way, speaking of fishing, we're going to spend the entire show next week focused on coastal Mississippi fishing. You don't usually think of fishing in the wintertime here, but as I've said so many times before, fishing's great this time of year. You just have to kind of dodge some cold weather here and there, and some very low tides at times, especially when those fronts come through. But the fishing's here, especially it's really good here, especially in the backwater fishing. I'm going to be joined by my friend Captain Sonny Schindler, and we're actually going to cover the full spectrum of fishing in a special Christmas on the Water edition of Super Talk Outdoors. That's next Monday. I say this every week, but Mississippi is the capital of the outdoors in the United States, from the incredible saltwater and freshwater fishing to its turkey, duck, and deer hunting, and all the other outdoor activities. We are so lucky to live here, and Super Talk Outdoors celebrates that blessing every single week. So now I want to welcome to Super Talk Outdoors my friend Ed Penny. He's the Director of Public Policy at Ducks Unlimited in the Southern region. He loves to hunt, and he personally just enjoys the outdoors. We're going to talk about kind of what's going on with the waterfowl season so far. We'll spend a little time toward the end talking about the Conservation Trust Fund that has an opportunity to make it through the legislature this year. And we'll just talk about hunting in general. But anyway, before I go any further, let me welcome Ed Penny to Super Talk Outdoors. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Ricky. Great to be back, and great to be able to experience another hunting season here in Mississippi. You do a great job of describing it, and everything that you were talking about is why we care so much about the state and why we do what we do. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Listen, I got to know you during this last season, our last legislative session, because you were on my show, Coast View, several times, talking about the Stewardship Trust Fund. And we'll talk more about that toward the end of the show. But essentially, it's a really important bill that would create millions of dollars for Mississippi and the opportunity for us to match with incredible numbers of federal funds. It made it through the House 117-2, unbelievable bipartisan support. It's really one of those transformative bills, one of those kind of once-in-a-lifetime bills. It didn't make it through the Senate. It's going to get reintroduced again this year, and we'll have the opportunity to talk more about it. But toward the end of the show today, we'll kind of bring people up to date on that. But I enjoyed working with you on that issue, my friend.
Yeah, Ricky, you're a big help, and we're trying to keep things moving in a positive direction. And one point I'd like to make it related to your description of everything we have here. Mississippians spend so much time in the outdoors. We spend millions of dollars a year of our own money for those things that help us catch fish. They help us chase ducks. They help us chase deer. And we want to make sure that some of that gets reinvested into those things. So, spend some money this Christmas, and hopefully that can help make some more places to enjoy it all.
Well, based on what I'm seeing, people are spending some money. Because, the pandemic brought a lot of people to the outdoors. People felt safer outdoors. So I would say the last 2 years, just in terms of people who go out on their boats, or people who go out on the lakes or offshore, or who go hunting, or just generally enjoy the outdoors. I saw where RV sales were up like at one point over 1,000%. But it's true that the outdoors, in some respects, has been reintroduced to a lot of people during the pandemic, hasn't it?
It has, and particularly for waterfowl here in the state. I think MDWFP reported the highest state duck stamp sales ever during the pandemic year. So last duck season, we had more duck hunters buying more state duck stamps, which that's good for habitat because all those dollars are going back into the resource.
Incredible. By the way, as we come to the end of this first segment, how's your hunting season been so far this year?
It's been good. I'll tell you a little bit more about how my opening day of duck season went in Mississippi, but it's going along in line. A few tough hunts, but it's always great to be outside. So I look forward to chatting more about that. But it's all about getting outside this time of year.
So when we come back with Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited, we'll talk about the waterfowl migration. Is it shifting west? What's going on north of us? Why is the weather so warm? Not that Ed can actually answer that particular question, but we'll talk about all the, some controversial issues. But at the end of the day, we're going to find out what the perspective is from Ducks Unlimited. We'll see you back here in just a second with Ed Penny.
It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Mathews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. By the way, as I always say, we're doing this show from the Foundation Studio. The foundation, the formal name for the foundation is the Foundation for Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, and they're not to be confused with the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. But who they are is a group of volunteers from across the state who raise millions of dollars to help not only the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, but also other projects across the state that are focused on preserving and conserving our ability to enjoy the outdoors, things that involve children and getting them into the outdoors. Just an incredible organization. But I can't tell you how pleased I am to be associated with this outstanding volunteer organization. John Taylor is the president, and if you look at the list of other members of the executive committee, Chris Gurge, Roy Noble Lee Jr., Peyton Self, and others, so many dedicated volunteers from across the state that are really focused on raising money so that we can preserve and enjoy our outdoor legacy in the state of Mississippi. And I should also point out that from time to time they get locked on an issue. They can be an issues-oriented organization, and they are great at collaborating with other organizations and creating coalitions. So when they get locked onto an issue, they mean it. They really do mean it because they are extraordinarily well connected. So anyway, let's get back to our guest, Ed Penny. Ed works for Ducks Unlimited. He's the director of public policy for the southern region. And when we went to break, we were just talking about his hunting experience so far this year. But you were mentioning your opening day in Mississippi. How did that go?
It was an interesting one, Ricky. And I've got family property in Cleveland County, so south of Vicksburg, around Port Gibson. And it's not a waterfowl hunting property. We've got a bass pond on the property that we also use to water our cows on the place. And we take the cows off in the fall, and it's always been good for fishing. We manage it for fishing, and we'll catch fish to fry up. It's a bass pond, so we like to catch bass and keep them and eat them. And Thanksgiving weekend is always a big weekend for hunting, and waterfowl season opened then. So my brother-in-law and I decided to go out to our farm pond because it has been dry, and we can talk more about that. But it's been dry all over the South and then over much of the country. And we just thought, well, we're going to go try to see if we can kill a couple wood ducks and have them for dinner that night. And we went out and actually killed a couple mallards, killed a couple wood ducks. So it far exceeded expectations. So that was the first part of the morning. Then I came back to the property, brought my 14-year-old son, who's part of his high school bass fishing team. He caught a few fish. And then we went deer hunting on the same property, and we were hoping to kill a deer. We saw a few deer, but we didn't pull the trigger. So to me, that's a good description of what we have in Mississippi. We can duck hunt, we can bass fish, we can deer hunt, and we have turkeys on the property. So we have all of that. Is it the best waterfowl place? Not really, but we have a couple good family hunts a year, and it's always fun. So, that made a really good memory for me this duck season.
So as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm hearing a spattering of reports from here and there. Now, if you talk to a duck guide like Chuck Cage, he's got some incredible holes that he fishes on, but he has some specific observations that he's made over the years, and we'll come back to what some of those are. For example, has the migration shifted to the west, et cetera. But before we get into some of those more detailed conversations, what are you just hearing in general about how things at the first part of the season is going, what the duck numbers look like, what you're seeing in behavior, et cetera?
That's a good question. It's always a topic of conversation. I've done several of these kinds of conversations over the last few weeks, and folks are paying attention. Hunters are always a very observational group, and what they are seeing makes a lot of difference, and there's some truth to that. Overall, and I'll speak about Mississippi, we are extremely dry. The Mississippi Delta is pretty barren when it comes to flooded habitat right now. The only couple of bright spots are wildlife management areas that MDWFP manages. Those are consistently managed, and this time of year in particular, when it's so dry, they're holding a lot of ducks. And folks are doing well. Hunters are having a lot of success, and particularly during the first couple of weekends, duck numbers have been strong. So that's a bright spot, and I encourage people to apply for the lottery hunts that they host and manage, because it is a good opportunity. The other thing is folks who are managing habitat on private lands are doing pretty well. So the things that we can control in Mississippi are habitat and hunting pressure. And I think the folks, whether it's a state agency or private landowners, the folks that are doing that are having success.
Well, that's good to hear. Like I say, I hear a spattering of reports, like my friend Travis and Mark. They had a really good hunt Saturday. They would have probably had a good hunt Sunday, but they had an issue with fog. Fog was, and they could see the birds circling above, but they couldn't get them into the decoy spread because, as we know, fog and duck hunting don't go together very well most of the time. But there are a lot of theories, and I mentioned to you that when I first got this land in the Delta, I heard people more than once say, "Oh, it's all DU's fault." And the more I came to understand the problem, I came to appreciate that maybe Ducks Unlimited could be a sort of a good blamer, someone to blame in the case of the duck migrations, But it's super complicated, isn't it, buddy? It's not just about creating habitat north of us. It's obviously there's weather involved. There's been a degradation of habitat in Mississippi. You just pointed out when we don't have a lot of water. First of all, we've been losing duck habitat in millions of acres over the past many years. But on top of that, when you don't have a lot of rain, and therefore you don't have a lot of water, that also affects things. But when someone, you're at a dinner party and someone says DU is the reason why we don't have the ducks we used to have in Mississippi Delta, what's your answer to them?
First of all, I usually say I've heard that one before, and we are not impervious to criticism. No group is perfect, no person is perfect, but Ducks Unlimited is doing the best that we possibly can to restore waterfowl habitat. We've lost over 17 million acres of wetlands in the U.S. since the 1950s. We are never, ever going to get back to that point. So waterfowl habitat is so important for a lot of reasons, but the work that Ducks Unlimited does, whether it's with private landowners or with state or federal agencies, DU doesn't own land. What we're trying to do is work at their request and with their cooperation to restore habitat on public lands that folks can hunt, and to help private landowners and farmers do the best thing that they can on their property for waterfowl and for their bottom line. So I hate to hear criticism, but it's going to happen, and we're going to do our best and keep doing our wetland conservation mission regardless of what folks may say or think.
Like I said, it's super complicated, but people say that they've done a better job in managing, not better than us, but I'm just saying generally they, relative to themselves, have done a better job of managing the duck habitat such that there's more food, there's more water, and that ducks don't have to come south. Is that a fair observation?
Well, I think that we always forget that waterfowl are not required to come to Mississippi, or they're not required to come to Louisiana or Arkansas or whatever state a person may be living in. It's our job as waterfowl managers and hunters to make them feel welcome. We can't fault, for example, the Missouri Department of Conservation for doing the best job that they can on their public areas to manage their habitat. It's incumbent upon us, and I say this as a Mississippian, not a DU person, but as a Mississippian, we can do a much better job of managing waterfowl habitat in this state to attract and hold waterfowl and to make it more enjoyable to hunt them here. So I hope that that's kind of what drives us. Let's not look or point fingers at other people because they're not doing the wrong thing in Missouri or wherever. We got to do better here in our own state.
Well, it's interesting. If I look at my own experience, I have over many years, because of friends I have who hunt, have had the opportunity to hunt all over the Delta. But it wasn't until my son started getting a little bit older and they could hunt, and I started to spend more time in the Delta hunting with friends like Lee and Sam Abraham in Greenwood, that I became more aware of what it meant to say, when we have ducks. Now I could see 2 or 3 or 4 flights and be thrilled to death, and they would say, this is nothing. We don't have ducks here right now. A couple of times I got to see what that looks like with thousands of greenheads, raining down. That's what we mean by ducks. When the migration is in your favor, you can have a lot of ducks. And just because you don't have the complete migration in your favor, like you pointed out, may never be what it was before, you can still have some great duck hunts. And so when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about how you define what it means to have ducks or not have ducks, based on your observations and the people you talk to. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation on Super Talk Outdoors with Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited. We'll see you after this break.
Mississippi to this land called home. I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on. I'll carry to walls and fall football.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors, live from Biloxi's Back Bay in the Foundation Studio, right here from the Foundation Studio. Really glad to be associated with that organization and their incredible work that they do across the state. We've got Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited, and we're really kind of chatting through some of the controversies. There are a lot of differing points of view, but one of the things that I do know for sure, Ed, because as you know, I came from newspapers and digital media companies and know about social media and how it works and artificial intelligence and all that fancy stuff. But it's really hard to run an organization like yours in a social media age, because it's easy for misinformation to get spread. And I bet you do spend a lot of time sort of overcoming misinformation, don't you?
We do. We do try to overcome all that, and we try to overcome it by putting out the actual accomplishments that we have on the ground with our partners. And I want to be clear in saying we can't do any of our work without the folks who own and manage the land. Again, private landowners, ranchers, farmers across the country, as well as agencies that manage public land for us. So without them, DU would not be doing our work. We are a partner in what they're doing.
Let's remind our listeners. Some may not know this, but nearly 90% of Mississippi's land is privately owned. So it requires that landowners be all in on conservation efforts, particularly as it relates to ducks. It was interesting. I mentioned to you that, and we're going to come back to your definition of what it means to have ducks. We'll come back to that in just a second. But I mentioned that on some property that we gained access to in Shula, we went like at the end of February, beginning of March, and there was some sheet water outside of what is essentially some CRP that on farmland. And man, I saw thousands of mallards. They were seems at every layer of the atmosphere raining in. And of course, the season had been over for 3 or 4 weeks. And then year before last, at our main camp, we have a 100-acre cypress lake, and our neighbor told us they saw nearly 1,000 mallards there at like the first week in February. Do you hear that a lot these days? Now, we have had a couple of years now, maybe a third year, where warm weather has really been sort of the name of the game. that we've seen that ducks have arrived, but they've arrived late. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, I hear that quite a bit, and I'll point out that we passed into law a couple of years ago with Senator Hyde Smith here from Mississippi, a bill to change the end date of duck season to the last day in January. So January 31st is the last possible day that it is federally allowed to duck hunt across the country now. We passed that. That was a great victory for us here in Mississippi, because we do hear that. But what that does, it gives us some flexibility to set duck seasons, both in the front end and in the back end. But we can't go into February. There's a lot of reasons for that, but there are federal frameworks that can't get us there. We do have a weekend for youth and for veterans now. That was an important part of that bill. So there's hunting opportunities in February for those groups. But we do hear that, and so much of that is related to habitat, Ricky. We talked a little bit earlier about what's most important. When folks, whether it's you or other folks in the Delta, are finished with hunting season, it's the last day of duck season, farmers that typically own that land have to grow their crops, and to grow the crops, they got to get them ready. And how they do that, they got to start pulling boards and pulling plugs on the fields that have been hunted all winter. So all that habitat in the Delta is starting to shrink. After the last day of duck season, it starts to shrink. And our folks that are flying surveys, MDWFP, sees it. It takes about a week for all that habitat to disappear. We do a pretty good job of getting water off the landscape at that time of year. So ducks, what's here all winter is now shrinking into what's available, less habitat. Therefore, we're seeing more ducks, and they're in places that we haven't seen them, and they haven't been hunted for a week. So yeah, that's all very important in where we're seeing ducks that time of year.
So when you think about actually the fact that we have less wetlands for ducks to enjoy, and the kind of you say we'll never be back to what it was, and that's for sure. But it takes private property owners to help create more of the kind of situation that they like, and that's the point of flooding big fields and creating sheet water and putting boards on some cypress breaks and whatever that might be. It is interesting that if the ducks are arriving late and you're already in a situation where you have less habitat for ducks, and then they start pulling the boards, and then we're even creating less habitat now. It'd be interesting historically if you do go year after year after year, that what does that contribution have to the duck situation? We probably never know for sure, but certainly it's got to have some kind of an impact. But when you talk about having ducks, how do you define that?
That's a good question too, and fun to talk about. And Ricky, we need to talk about this in the duck blind sometime. When do we have ducks? This time of year, and I'll kind of walk through the winter and what I've seen in Mississippi and some other states. In Mississippi, we get an early migration of ducks in November. We always get kind of a cold snap and Halloween time frame, and we do start seeing some ducks. And again, we don't have a ton of habitat, but we do get ducks that time of year. The coastal Louisiana gets them, Arkansas gets them. We see a migration of ducks at that time of year. Then, so we get that migration and we start hunting around Thanksgiving here. So we've got ducks that are living and moving around the Mississippi Delta and around the 3-state region. And we got to remember the ducks can fly. They don't have to stay in one place. They move around. So now this time of year, early December, before Christmas, we're still, subsisting and living as a duck hunter. We're living on that first migration event, and ducks kind of trickle in. But right now, based on what we've heard from the survey reports, duck numbers are lower. There's, mallard numbers are, I think, 30% lower than they have been this time of year prior, compared to previous years. They're flying right now, so we'll have a better picture at the end of this week or early next week. But mallard numbers are down. Total duck numbers are about the same. Then what we start hearing this time of year is Missouri's got a lot of ducks. They've seen that big migration push that they typically get from a big cold snap. So they're seeing ducks now. Kansas is seeing ducks on public areas. They now have kind of the first big migration. Okay. So Mississippi, we're starting to get antsy and a little frustrated because we want that cold weather and we haven't had it because we've had this December lull, this early December calm time with stale weather. And when we're talking about fishing instead of hunting, that's happening right now. And we start getting ducks, in my opinion, and what the data is showing. We'll get a good migration here in the next week or so, but that early January migration event, that first good cold front, not a cold snap, but a cold front, is when we start seeing duck numbers here in the state. And then hopefully those cold fronts start happening more often in January. And that's when we have ducks, is mid-January.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let's come back to the point that Chuck Cage, the outfitter from the Delta, said on our show, that he believes there is a shift to the west, that toward Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. What's your view on that?
I think that some of that is occurring, and again, ducks do not have to come to Mississippi to live out the winter. Hopefully, we do a good job of taking a few and enjoying them. But you know, the same folks are saying it in Arkansas. I mean, Arkansas is still phenomenal duck hunting. Louisiana is still phenomenal duck hunting. Did Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas get ducks? Yes, they always have. They've always had good waterfowl hunting, but people haven't known about it. And now it is much easier to see the fruits of their harvest on social media. It's easier to hear about it because we can text our buddies in Oklahoma who we've never met before and find out what's happening. We can make a one-day drive to western Oklahoma and go chase ducks for a few days. That's real. They do have ducks, but they've had them for a long time, and folks are just now starting to realize that.
That's so interesting. You know, I've heard about some really, really sort of tough spring and summer conditions as it relates to the breeding grounds, and also about the whole notion of the drought and how that impacts. When you add all that together, that can't be good for us.
It's been tough the last couple of years, and I want to be clear in saying that harvest by duck hunters is not what drives the health of duck populations. It's what happens with habitat, and we can talk more about that. But it has been tough, especially this year. Duck breeding conditions in the U.S. and Canada have been very difficult, and as a result of that, we've had fewer young ducks produced. And that's what we live on in the South, and that's what we see, and that's what we harvest and see in our bags are young ducks.
This is Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited. When we come back, I want to talk about maybe some of the policy work they're involved in these days, and we'll also mention the Stewardship Trust Fund that didn't make it out of the legislature last year and will be reintroduced this year. We'll see you after this break.
Out on his limb, whistling that sweet soul for him. I said 3 Mississippi to this land called home. I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on, I'll carry on, Mississippi.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Mathews on Super Talk, Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. We have Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited with us today. You know, Ed, one of the things that is amazing to me is that when we don't have the numbers of ducks, you can still have some good duck hunts. And just the thought of having a good duck hunt and getting out and getting into a blind with my son and my friends and just enjoying the morning. We have this really special place inside one of our lakes that needs to be cleaned out. And the water's kind of low right now. So we're gonna now that everything's died off, we're gonna get in there with some chainsaws and open it up and get some of that junk out of the way. We talked about building a really cool blind there where we can eat breakfast and all of that. But just having that conversation, you know, just the planning of that event, and then, you know, the thought of getting in there together and enjoying this duck hunting, which is such a great social event. You know, all of that happens and we never even fired a gun. You hear that all the time, though, don't you? That there's just this like a community around it, and we're making incredible memories because of the social aspect. Deer hunting is more of a, you're usually alone, or maybe you have a kid or a family member with you. But duck hunting is a very social thing, isn't it?
It is. It's extremely social, and everything you've described, I'm smiling thinking about it, because even in dry winters, we can do good things for ducks, and we can enjoy duck hunting. And that, to me, that's what this year is about, is set our expectations. It's likely not going to be a big duck population, or we know it's not coming out of the breeding grounds, but set our expectations of enjoying being outdoors in your duck hole, in your deer stand. That's what it's about. And that's becoming more and more clear to me every year. Let's forget about all the conspiracy theories and all the poor duck numbers, and we're not going to go hunting because we don't, quote, have ducks yet. Just go hunting. That's what it's about. Take somebody and go hunting.
We talked about policy, and we don't have time to get into a bunch of DU policy stuff. But one of the things I want to really mention, though, is that when the state looked at the Stewardship Trust Fund, which would have created an up to $15 million a year, essentially taking a sales tax that would have been used for that came from sale of sporting goods and outdoor goods, would have been diverted over to this fund that would have given us the opportunity to match federal funds. For example, the farm bill is over $7 billion. It may be more than that now, that we could match that funds with. And what's happening is Mississippi is only 2 states in the Southeast that don't have such a fund. And you mentioned this migration to the west, but what you're seeing in all of our neighboring states is they're using the trust fund to improve their habitat. I mean, that's just the reality, isn't it?
That's exactly right, Ricky. And we talked about Missouri Department of Conservation, and DU does work with them. We work on the lands they own and where folks hunt, but they have that resource. They got that resource in I think it was 1976 or the 80s. They were the first ones to get a conservation funding mechanism. They get 1/10% of their general sales tax and put it on conservation. That helps them restore waterfowl habitat and manage waterfowl habitat in their state. And believe you me, they're also doing their part by sending it to the breeding grounds too, to take care of ducks. Arkansas's got the same thing. They passed theirs in the mid-90s. Alabama's got one. Tennessee's got some measure of conservation funding. It's us in Louisiana. We've got to do more here in this state because, and we can talk a little bit more some other time, but DU does a ton of work on the federal level to help bring dollars to states for duck hunters to see the benefit of. I'm ready to see us in Mississippi increase the scale and increase the pace of what we can accomplish for ducks here in the state.
Well, as I mentioned, it made it to the House 117-2. It did not make it out of the Senate. One of the concerns I heard was that there was some concerns about it involving private land. But if you think about this for a second, if 90% of the land in Mississippi is private land and the bulk of the federal money we'd be matching it with is coming from the Farm Bill, which is private land, how do you do effective conservation, particularly from a duck habitat point of view, without involving private lands? I don't understand that.
That's exactly right. And going back to the point that farmers and ranchers are controlling what happens on their property, 90% of the land in Mississippi, and even more than that, I think, in the Delta, is controlled by private landowners and managed by private landowners. Without them, we can't do things that impact ducks positively here. And you can say the same thing for the breeding grounds. North Dakota ranchers are managing what's happening on the breeding grounds. Canadian farmers are controlling what's happening there. So without private lands and without working with them and leveraging their own dollars with state and federal dollars, we can't impact ducks here in the state.
Well, I'm hearing that we might be able to find a compromise on that bill. It's going to get reintroduced, and hopefully we can get this done, and we can have literally a once-in-a-generation conservation trust fund in Mississippi. Ed Penny, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you, my friend.
Always great to see you and hear you. Look forward to talking more later.
You bet. Merry Christmas to you as you continue to enjoy, especially duck and deer and fishing this time of year. Please stay safe. Don't fall in the water. You don't want to fall in the water this time of year. And make sure your straps on your tree stands are safe. Keep your gun unloaded when you're not hunting. I mean, all the basics. We forget about the basics this time of year. Stay safe. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.